Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters. To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces. We hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to our next podcast, talking all things ESG and diversity, inclusion, equity. My name is Tasha. I'm the founder director of Diverse Matters, and I'm going to welcome you to our wonderful guests. We've got two wonderful guests here from law firm Mills and Reeves. I will introduce Ainslie first. Ainslie, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ainslie Wilson-Shearer. I'm Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Wellbeing at Mills and Reeves.
Lovely, thank you. And over to you, Jess.
So I'm Jessica Wilkes-Ball. I'm the Senior Sustainability Manager at Mills and Reeves.
Lovely, nice to have you here. The reason I wanted to do this podcast is because sometimes people, as we know, sadly, don't see the importance of ESG, so don't always see the importance of EDI or DEI, whichever you call it, and they wouldn't even necessarily think they even align or they interact with each other, which we'll talk about as well. So for me, this podcast is really about raising the awareness of what each of them are, how they intertwine, how they can really support each other, and really that all organisations should be doing both ESG and EDI, basically. For those, I think ESG is something that are quite new to some organisations, particularly maybe small organisations where it's not such a focus. So Jess, if you can let us know, just giving a broad overview of what is the E, what is the S, and what is the G, please.
I'm not going to steal Ainslie's thunder and talk too much about the S, but I'll do a little pocketed overview for you. So ESG, my opinion is that ESG is everything that businesses have been doing for years around CSR, so corporate social responsibility, what they've been doing around inclusion, diversity, wellbeing, looking at things, the philanthropy, all of that kind of stuff. But it's been rebadged, I think. So yeah. ESG came out of the financial services sector, so very much a sector where they love an acronym and they love to label things. So ESG in broad terms is environmental, social and governance. Now they're all interlinked because governance is the glue really that holds it all together. But the environment, that pretty much speaks for itself, is what are we doing to make sure that we don't go over 1.5 degrees of warming? Where are we on the Paris aligned goals to make sure that by 2050 we're all working as closely to net zero as possible, and reducing our impact on the environment through our consumption of materials. And then the S, that's the social piece. So that's the bit that I think businesses have probably been doing better for longer against environment, because it's, are you a good place to work? Are you a nice culture? But are you also making sure that people are able to bring their whole self to work? And are they being supported to be the best that they want to be in an environment that supports them both emotionally, in a well-being way, but also economically as well? So are we a nice place to be? And then the governance, as I said, that's very much, for me, that's in my world, in the E bit, that's very much a regulatory thing. So reporting on our emissions, being very transparent with what we're doing, but also making sure that any decision we make in the business has ESG absolutely threaded into it. So every project is making sure that we're looking at the impact on our people, the environment, the sort of client piece, but also what the community element is. So I think it's a new acronym, so to speak, but businesses have been doing it for years. But now's the time where they're having to step up to report more and have more transparency about how they're actually achieving being a nice place to work, but also that they're not having an adverse impact on the people or the planet.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Perfect. And Ainslie, how does that, like Jess has already said, a lot of the organisations would have been maybe doing some of this, doing some in more areas than others, and sometimes just a rebadging and renaming it. How do you link, as a head of diversity, inclusion and wellbeing, how do you link in with ESG? And what does it mean to you to have that interaction between the two?
Yeah, so I think probably when people look at ESG and EDI and how they interact with one another, the most obvious place that people go to is the S. The S, the social, is quite a broad church, and it covers quite a lot of the kind of societal and workplace issues that a lot of organisations will already be really familiar with. And I would say D and equality sit most obviously within the S, alongside things like volunteering and fundraising and broader CSR. But actually, I think when you look at ESG as a whole, D&I cuts across it all, because the climate crisis impacts people. So that's where your D&I sits. And actually, when you really drill down into how it impacts people, it impacts marginalised groups more than it impacts power groups. So I think there's ways in which that it sits under the E as well. And it's ways in which it sits in governance, because actually governance is about how our companies are managed and run, and it's about ethical leadership. And in order to have ethical leadership, you need to have diverse leadership. So actually, I think D&I cuts across it all. But if you're looking at a kind of broad D&I program, you're probably going to put it most obviously within the S. But I think really important for organisations to understand how it interacts with everything, and how a broad ESG team, or even some people are calling it a responsible business team. It's very similar things. I think Jess is right. We all love a good acronym, and ESG is just a bit of a new acronym for something we're all hopefully a little bit familiar with. But obviously each organisation is going to be on a different path and at a different point in that journey.
Yeah, and definitely when I was thinking about this, I thought it's so true that it cuts across all of it, because even when you think about data, even think about what you have to collate. Gosh, when you're doing your DEI work, oh my gosh, how much data you need to collect, and that is the people. That is so that, and if you have got good governance, if you are driving and committed and having DEI embedded through everything you do, that should be embedded in governance as well, shouldn't it? If you're there and you're thinking, how can I make sure that both ESG and EDI and wellbeing really is in all functions of the organisation, it's embedded, it's got to be in the governance as well, hasn't it? Yeah, and even when you said about the environment, also we know that lots of having different communities and ideas is great to feed into what needs to happen with the environment. Absolutely. So for those of you out there thinking, what? It absolutely does fit into all three, E, S and G. So in terms of how sort of things have you done, whether you've currently worked together on joint event or joint activities? You know, either of you, I'll start with you, Jess, if there's anything you add first, and say that in terms of, I know that both of you work well together in terms of making sure that the firm does what they need to do to be their absolute best when it comes to ESG and EDI. Can you give any examples of anybody out there thinking, oh, what do I need to be doing?
I think it was taking it back to basics and really looking at it in the round and not in a siloed thinking way. I think all businesses fall into that trap. And for me, Ainslie and I spent quite a lot of time looking at ways in which we can tell the story about what we're doing for our community, and that could be anything from biodiversity projects through to schools outreach, and it's all about using our people and our time effectively to affect change externally, and it's having projects where we can really see a mutual benefit. I think underneath all of that is how we've approached the governance side, and we're very proud members of the United Nations Global Compact, and as part of that we have aligned our activity to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we sat and we did a workshop, and actually there was a lot of synergy across the different goals, especially around partnerships. Ainslie makes a brilliant point about how climate change can really affect marginalised groups, and I think bringing that to the forefront of people's minds, because I don't want everyone to be a tree hugger. I just want people to understand that the impacts that they are having on the environment has a huge ripple effect around the world. So we spent a lot of time looking at the governance piece and the Sustainable Development Goals, and we actually sat there and took stock of, we're doing a lot to try and achieve these as a business, and we're really contributing towards them. And the longer term plan now is to be able to communicate that in a really succinct way publicly. So what are we doing through our activity? How is that linked to our case studies, and what the impact of that is longer term on the Sustainable Development Goals? Because they're really easy to understand. We sit in meetings and looking at great big spreadsheets and looking at all these really complicated data, but actually publicly, what do people want to know? What are you doing to combat climate change? What are you doing for gender equality? How are you working in partnership? What are you doing about resource and consumption? and how you improving the education of the communities in which you live and work. So I think for me, the governance piece has been a really good exercise for us to do, because it links everything together. I don't know if there's anything else that we've done, Ainslie, that you think that we've also done on top of that.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head, to be honest, Jess. And I think even as people who work in this space, and this is our lifeblood and it's the way that we make our living. So I'd like to think that we are subject matter experts. But even for us, I think it was quite surprising when we sat down and went through all of that, how much of it is all interlinked with one another. And Jess is leading on this absolutely fabulous biodiversity project at the firm at the moment with one of our partners. And even when we sat down and looked at that, and we've got teams of people going out and volunteering with them now, and I'm like, her biodiversity, very clearly sustainability project, immediately becomes part of the social piece as well, because we've got volunteers going out, and we've got volunteers going out into green spaces. So it's really impacting their well-being, and activities like that really engage people are great for inclusion, and building green spaces and supporting biodiversity is brilliant for our communities. There's been lots of research that shows that having green space on your doorstep, it improves your well-being. So even everything that we do, and I think one of the challenges in this space is making sure that it's not just the subject matter experts who understand that, and getting everybody across whole organizations and whole communities to be thinking about all of the different positive impacts that this work can have, regardless of whether it's under the E, the S, or the G.
And have you had, no, that's so good. So they're out doing activities and volunteering. Have you had any challenges, or how have you found, because I know your role at Mills and Reeves is relatively newish. It's only been a couple of years or so, is it, if I remember rightly. Have you had any challenges with people buying into sort of ESG and initially, and then the link to DEI? How have you found that? Whether it could be not just at where you work, but wider. You had any challenges in getting people to understand the importance of it?
Do you want to take that one, Jess?
I think
go for it.
We'll both just sit here and go, yes, because if it was easy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's not, and we're quite honest in our business, and not quite honest in our firm, and we can have those difficult conversations and have that opportunity to challenge, but also opportunity to collaborate, but also to innovate as well. So how do we tackle that? I think in law, so I've worked in a regulated sector before, and evidence. Why are you doing this? Show me the evidence. What are our competitors doing? Because that's where you get the skin in the game, and it's very much very much a focus on what's everybody else doing, who's going to blink first, but also how far above the parapet do we put our head? Because you can become that sort of tall poppy kind of thing, and then people come for you and go, actually, I'm going to challenge that and challenge that. But we like challenge. I don't think we'd be in roles like ours if we didn't like challenge. Yeah. We're working on our science-based targets initiative at the moment, and the submission of that. And we had a meeting last week, and the consultants came and went, right, this is all the things you need to do to hit your 2050 target. We're getting pressure to change that to 2040. And we sat in this room, and there was this silence of people going, this is a really big job. And I'm like, yeah. I'm telling you, this is why I can't just go, 2040, let's just change it, it's fine. I'm hope to be retired by then. Jokes. You sit there and go, you can't do it without the data. You can't do it without a really measured approach to it. And that's where the difficulties lie. But when you come to it with the evidence, people start to sit back, and it was really funny. I saw a colleague sit back and go, oh, sort of see really slowly. But it's great for me, because I'm like, I can wang on about this all day, and people be like, I turn up at a meeting and they go, oh God, she's here again. What's she going to talk about now? What's she going to tell us off for doing now? But actually, we've all got to make small changes to get us on that journey. And it's not telling people they can't do something. It's asking them to think about the way in which they're doing it. Yeah. So that's my approach to it.
Yeah. What about you, Stefan? Have you had any challenges in terms of trying to get that message across?
Yeah. So I think yes. And I think that probably a lot of the challenge that comes to mind for me is around really helping people to understand that ESG and D&I are so interlinked, like we've been talking about right up to this point. And I think the kind of recommendation that I would give to any organization who are planning to start out on this journey is be really clear what you mean when you're talking about ESG, what you mean when you're talking about diversity, inclusion, and well-being. Whatever acronym you choose to use, whether you choose to call it one of those things or responsible business, or even talk about social value, there's lots of different ways to talk about that. But be very clear with all of your stakeholders what it means, because I think where I've seen us fall down sometimes is we say ESG because it easily rolls off the tongue. And what we mean is sustainability and environment. People don't think about the S and the G. They just think about the E. So I think that clarity can really help people to understand. And I think it's something that we're getting better at. But I think for me, that's been the main challenge, is getting people to understand I'm not separate from ESG. I'm part of the ESG team, and we deliver ESG holistically as a whole, not as a focus on one particular area of it.
Yeah. And I think both those areas, I'm sitting here nodding going, gosh, yes, because so many people still, even when we talk about EDI, do not think how fundamental it is to the success of your business or your organisation. And the same with ESG, and what people need to, like you said, Jess, and I was laughing, and you just said it again, Ainsley, whatever you want to call it, really it's about being the best you can be in an organisation, full stop. Whether it's the best employer to your people, you're supporting your people, they're achieving their best potential. Whether it's stopping even wastage, the environment, isn't that good for everybody? If you're looking at an approach for your organisation, saves you money, helps the environment, doing things better. And I think so many people, and I've noticed it more over the more recent years, that people are trying to still say, I haven't got time to do ESG, I haven't got time to do EDI. Do you know what I mean? In that voice. And you think, oh my gosh, you're just not getting it. And then they don't understand the pitfalls of what happens if they don't do it. So what would you say to people, those doubters who are like, oh, don't do it? If you don't do EDI and ESG, because people need to know the reasons why it's going to benefit them, what are the pitfalls? What if some people listening going, oh, here we go, stuff and nonsense, ticking a box, which it absolutely isn't. What could we tell them to go, you know what, if you don't do this is what's going to happen?
Yeah, look, the ultimate for me is that if you don't pay attention to sustainability, and you don't pay attention to how you're governing your organization, and you don't pay attention to having a diverse workforce and having an inclusive culture, then the ultimate outcome of that is you do not have a long-term viable organization, because you're not going to be attracting the talent. And any organization, regardless of what services they're delivering or what their purpose is, relies on the people that are employed there to deliver that for them. And so you therefore want the best talent in your organization. And if you're not paying attention to all of these things, then you're not going to have that, and you're not going to be attracting that talent. There's loads. I'm not going to sit here and cite all the research, because there's huge amounts of it. You can Google all of it. But Gen Z in particular, the leaders of the future, they are not sticking with organizations that don't have purpose-driven, that are not purpose-driven. They're the most likely to vote with their feet and walk out the door, and you're wasting so much money on recruiting them then. You might as well bring them in and keep them. And in order to keep them, then you've got to be paying attention to this stuff. And I think that's my little soapbox moment. But that I genuinely believe that about organizations, that there's no long-term viability if you're ignoring this.
Yeah. Definitely. And as you were saying that, I'm nodding, because I remember over the last few years when we were talking to applicants or people checking you out, when I was working in an organisation, they had to say, and what are you doing about wellbeing? What are you doing about EDI? It's not like years before where people would be in a job a couple of years, or they'd stay in a job a long time. They want to know what the benefits are. They want that balance, don't they? So that's a good point. Anything else, Jessica? If people don't do it, what could happen?
I think it's that retention and attraction piece, but also wastage. So if you're not looking at the ways in which you're operating your business and making sure that's environmentally sustainable, you're never going to be economically sustainable, and your business will just die effectively. There's also research to show that businesses that are more switched on to ESG perform better, are more agile at making decisions, and are actually much more attractive to investors and also to the general public. And trial by media can make or break a business. And anything you do in a negative way that impacts the environment or impacts people will honestly be used against you. And being more on the front foot about saying, these are our targets, 5 years later, actually, we haven't hit some of these. Don't bury it. Be really truthful, be really honest. I talk about this a lot, but Tony's Chocolonely, one of my favourite brands. I think they're amazing. I love everything they stand for. Amazing chocolate as well. But last year, they, in their annual report, they were front and centre and they said, we know we have child labour in our supply chain. And they were really open and honest about it. How many other businesses would take that risk? I would say none. So they knew that there was a problem, and they knew they had to highlight it, and they knew they were wanting to have to put things in to mitigate that risk in their supply chain. And actually, it's been a real step change in a lot of food and beverage industries of saying, we really want to know what's happening more. We want to do much more in it. Again, I was at an event the other week, sat with people there from a sugar manufacturer, and it was fascinating. And they were saying, we grow sugar, and they were saying we can grow it in the UK, but actually because of the weather and it's been so poor, we haven't got the yield. So we're having to bring it in from abroad where it's growing, but actually that's a lot of that is out of their hands because of the change in the climate. So it's okay to make decisions to keep your business sustainable as long as you can back it up with the actual science and the reasons why. And I think transparency, again, is so important when it comes to businesses. You can go on a lovely website and say, oh, we do all these great things, but then you read their annual report and buried in the back, it's we're just paying to offset our emissions. That's not right.
Yeah.
I think as well, if you look at the flip side of that and you look at practitioners doing what we all do as a job, it's understanding how you can frame it to show the benefit to everybody. So I was having a conversation about inclusion just earlier today, actually, and we were talking about the kind of well-being element of inclusion. And I was saying, if you don't have people in your team who feel included, their productivity is not going to be as high because their well-being will be impacted. And if their productivity is not as high, they're either A, not going to be delivering as much work for your clients, or they're going to be delivering the same volume of work but over a longer period of time, so their working hours will be up. Now, in the legal sector where we work, if someone's working hours are up, then they're going to be charging more to their clients. And if we're charging more to our clients, that's not great for relationship management. If we can't accurately estimate how much we're going to be charging our clients, then they're going to be looking elsewhere for their legal provider. And so I think when you can turn almost anything into a commercial benefit, and actually that is one of the ways in which to get some of those doubters on board, is say, here are the commercial benefits to doing this in a very relevant way to them. So understanding how it impacts their clients and the relationships that they're building with their clients. And you can turn that around to anything. If you don't have a client-led business and perhaps you're a charity, you've got to think about how it impacts the amount of money that you're raising for your beneficiaries, and how you're distributing that money, and how many volunteers you're getting on board. There are impacts to everything, regardless of whether you're a profit-making business or not.
No, definitely. And even things like we don't like to talk about it when it comes to why do it and why embed in, why address ESG and EDI. Things like reputation, things like you don't want to be up for litigation. You don't want to be people there saying being fined, being charged, be discrimination cases, all those things you mentioned, retention. This is why it is important. People need to know those benefits, because it is. You could be in bother if you're not doing things correctly. And this is where this is where my ignorance comes, Jessica, when it comes to ESG. What are the frameworks you've got with the equality? You've got the Equality Act. You've got, laws around how people should be making sure they're eliminating discrimination, providing opportunity, equality of opportunity, etc. What is there in terms of ESG? The sort of overarching. Are there anything around that? They got any guidelines or
How
laws?
long have you got?
Oh God! See, this is what I'm making with you. I don't know. Give me a little soups on, a little overview of some things that just so organisation is listening, because I do think honestly, this is very new to a lot of people. So just some key things that they need to be looking out for if they want to go. Actually, after this, I'm going to look at what things I can start doing and what things I need to be looking out for?
So doing a basic carbon footprint calculation.
Yes.
So looking
Yeah.
at your basic emissions, there's lots of free tools out there. The WWF do one, which is really good. They've got a personal one, and they've also got one for business as well. That's just to give you a baseline. The larger your business gets, the more red tape there comes with that. So certain sizes of businesses in the UK, and forgive me for not knowing the levels off the top of my head, but there's something called the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting Initiative, so SECR, which is a very basic overview of your impact on the environment on the different scopes. So scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. So scope 1 and 2 is pretty much energy, grey fleet, that kind of thing, and scope 3 is pretty much anything else. So you purchase goods and services, you're commuting, that kind of stuff. If you are a small organisation, you know, it's going to be quite easy for you to do a bit of a quick and dirty calculation. The bigger your organisation gets, the more help and the more, what I would say is, look to expertise that you can bring in for that. We work with a brilliant carbon partner. We work with some really fantastic organisations who help to validate that data for us, because we're, again, regulated by the SRA, but when we get asked for information, we have to make sure that it's been validated. But I think the starting point is understand what your baseline is. And that could be quite hard if you're in a shared office space, or if you use it somewhere like a WeWork, for example. How do you calculate that? So that's quite complicated, but don't over egg it, is what I'm going to say. So look to trusted partners. And I said something on another podcast the other week about find your own algorithm, and I was like, I'm going to patent that, because you have to, because you have to find who you trust and what brands you trust. So things like WWF, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, those kinds of organisations are out there and they exist, and they're known for being pretty legit. So look at that kind of thing. Also, if you're in an industry where there's a number of you who collaborate on panels or a part of a bigger membership group, collaborate. We're members of the Legal Sustainability Alliance, and that's hundreds of law firms who are all tackling this. And actually, they leave competition at the door in these meetings. And we come to collaborate, and we come to discuss the issues that are facing us all. So look for opportunities for collaboration around that. And then there's something called the Energy Savings Opportunities Scheme, ESOS. You're really testing my memory here. So ESOS, again, applies to certain levels of business to look at how you're operating your building, or running your building management system all the time. Where are the opportunities for saving, that kind of thing. So we do both of those. There's the bigger you get, the more there is. So there's something called CDP. Forgive me, I can't remember what that is, but that's like a global index for companies. There's the United Nations Global Compact. There's some brilliant free resources on there. You don't have to be a member to access some of their resources. So again, really would encourage people to have a look at that. And then, you know, just keep in the know. There's some great websites. The Guardian climate change section is absolutely fantastic. There's a brilliant article recently about the Atacama Desert and how it's full of clothes that get returned to retailers, and they're just being dumped in the desert. And it makes me really cross. I wanted to say a stronger word, but I'll go with cross. But you can see it from space. You can see the piles of clothes with tags on, just rotting, probably not rotting because they're full of plastic and nasty things, in the Atacama Desert. And recently there was a designer who went out there and did a fashion show.
Oh my gosh.
Based on all of the stuff that was in there. Honestly, I was angry, and I'm sat there going, this is driving this is what's causing the problem, consumerism and this constant need. And it's just been shipped over and being dumped in the desert. And I was really angry, and I'm like, I need to step away. I need to go and find something that's going to cheer me up, because, but this comes back to Tash about everybody has the ability to make some change, and everybody has the opportunity to put their pound where they want to. And it's how we get that message across to the younger generation about what they're doing. And on the other hand, they're probably the most engaged in climate change, but they also don't see the effects because it's not on their doorstep. So how do we measure that? But honestly, it was an amazing article, but maybe. Oh my gosh. And you mentioned it briefly, both of you. So it's to see if there's anything to add. But like I said, you might people listening to this from you, like you said, the bigger it gets, the more responsibility, more things.
But some people might be in a small organisation, handful of people, like you said, might be a charity where they're delivery of services. If an organisation, small organisation, hadn't looked at either ESG or EDI, do you think as a starting point they should do it together at the beginning, like you say, whatever they call it, or would do it? What advice would you give to somebody if they're, like I said, I think for bigger organisations, after you've got the resource, it's really good at your firm, you've actually got your sales in place and you've got other people in the team, you've actually got an ESG team and an EDI team and wellbeing, which is really good. Some people have got nothing. And sadly, as we know, in this small organisation, it lands on one poor soul. Ainslie will know this because historically, you've got one EDI person, how many hundreds of thousands of people? And then they'll be like, oh, and now you're putting ESG on me as well. Just for those smaller organisations, my thing would be, listen, start small and carry on because you can't do it all in one go. But what advice would you give to those organisations who haven't got the resources as larger organisations might have? Ainslie?
Yeah, I think same as you, Tash. I'm always like, understand your limitations. Like, what can you actually deliver in terms of change? But I think maybe even before that, just understanding why it's important to your organization and what can you do with that limited resource. So one of the things that you could look at, for example, is can your HR team take on responsibility for ensuring that all the policies are inclusive? Is the language that you're using in your family policies inclusive of all different types of families and all different ways that people build a family, for example? And that can be something that's taken on. You don't have to be an EDI expert. You just need to know what the options are out there. So taking half an hour to research what are the different ways that you can talk about families and what are the ones that actually include all different types of families, that's a relatively easy first step, I would say. Now, as you get more mature or grow as an organization or potentially bring in experts to do the job, yes, you might run those audits again and find more stuff to change, and that's fab. But actually just start really small, make some small changes that are really going to have a positive impact on the people who work for you, your beneficiaries, your clients, whoever your stakeholders are. I think is start small, do what you can do. And I would say if you are starting out and you're like, oh God, is it ESG or DEI? Just if you're going to do the broader ESG piece and look at sustainability as well as diversity, inclusion and well-being and all of the other societal things, then do it all. Just start. It's easier to just start it all together rather than trying to bring them together at a later date can be more challenging. But I think understand what you can do and start small.
Lovely, thank you. What about yourself, Jess?
I think I'd echo what Ainslie said. Sometimes businesses try to retrofit these things and it doesn't work. So find people who can be advocates for you across the business, collectively come together, use the enthusiasm that every business will have. But also you want to find those critical friends, but also you want the ones who are going to be the pains. You want the challengers and you want to engage them all in what it is you're trying to do. And nothing's ever personal in this. It's never that. It's trying to make your business the best it can be, whether it's socially, economically, environmentally, however you want to do it. And collaboration, I talk about this all the time. Everybody gets sick of me banging on about it, but it's true because you can't do it on your own. And it's you know, I'm going to get all X Factor now, but it is a journey for everybody. We're all trying to do the best thing. You know, somebody said to me last week, if you get 60% of people on your side, then you're doing pretty well. I was like, actually, I'll take that. I'll take 60% because there's always something to grow at. But if you get 60% on, that's the majority. So you're halfway to success. So I think that's the piece for me.
And I think, you know, we've said this before, I'm sure all of us said this in our world, that it's about making sure it is integrated fully and it's not that little over there that I need to do. So when people are doing their organisational plans, their business plans, whatever they're doing, it's not, we'll have a little bit of an EDI plan, ESG plan over there. That really, when you're looking at everything you're doing, all your functions of what you do as a business or an organisation, you're doing it from the beginning. And I think that's what we say. So when people are doing a new business plan, doing a new organisational strategy, development strategy, whatever they're doing, that they consider all those things as ESG and EDI as part of it, because I think people, that's often historically, it happens again and again. That's where they make a mistake, isn't it? You think, oh my gosh. And like you said, I think you said earlier, Jess, doing things retrospectively. No, trying to make it fit. You should do it right at the beginning. And when you mentioned advocates, I was like, yeah, because in the world of, inclusion champions, diversity champions, all those things are very well known. And like you say, it doesn't help, just not one person, and particularly if you've got those smaller organisations, if you've got those people who can help drive it. I used to work in an organisation where I was the only person in a charity, and I tell you what, those champions were brilliant, and those champions helped to drive it and drive and move things forward. And I like the fact that you also said, get also the ones who might not be, not the challengers, because then you can get to see different people's point of view, can't you, as well? So that's really important. Have you got, I don't know if you've got in the minute any ESG champion, because I think that's probably less known about, any sort of chat. Have you got any M&R, or have you seen that happen in organisations much so far?
I think what's been difficult for us is Ainslie has nailed DIW at Mills and Reeve. I'm going to say that. Brilliant group of networks. She's got all these networks, and we want to replicate that brilliant work that Ainslie's done, but we don't want to duplicate, and we don't want to spread ourselves too thin. So we are creating a steering group for sustainability and nature. Brilliant. And putting nature in there, because I think it's really important. And then we will have an activist network. So,
oh my gosh, I love that.
So not champions, it's a network. So it'll be a formal network. I know, look at you, he's bigging me up now. But this all comes from the, so there's no point in reinventing the wheel, because our networks are brilliant.
Yeah.
Do what we need to do. Let's make sure that what we are doing is really meaningful, but it gives people a purpose. Yeah. But it also gives them an opportunity to say, I'm going to sound like if you see something that doesn't look right, tell us. Yeah. But that's what it needs to be, because I don't know what's happening in our Norwich office, because I live in Shropshire. Someone says to me, actually, Jess, I'm not happy about this. What do we do? And say, there's a challenge for your activists. Yeah. So it's having a group of people who can challenge, who can implement, but also be advocates for what we're trying to do. And we're getting there, and we now have board sponsors for both environmental and social. The governance piece is all the way through it. So we are being really actively encouraged and supported in that. So it's happening. We're not perfect, and nobody's perfect.
It's an ongoing thing you develop.
Yeah. And we're getting there. We are getting there.
I love that, and I love the fact of activism. And I think, because sometimes even in EDI, people are often challenged by terms like ally. I know people use active allies, but there's been a lot of talk about we should be in solidarity, co-conspirators, joint activists. So that gives it a stronger feel sometimes, doesn't it? In terms of we want to get something done. And I think, like you say, use what you've got, and you've got to say, because you've already got half those people who are in the networks, they can support you as well. So I think that's a really good idea, rather than repeating, see what resource you've got. That's a really good idea. Love it. Excellent. Anything, I'm trying to think, I think we've covered quite a bit for those people who are getting into the world of ESG in alignment with EDI and wellbeing. Anything else you think would be useful just to share with any of the listeners about this topic that we may not have said so far?
I would just add probably to what Jess was saying there around having advocates or allies or activists, or whatever you want to call them, is if you're an employer, if you're on the board or you're a chief executive, make sure you're giving people the time to do that in there, because these things don't work if people don't feel that they have the time to commit to it, and especially when it's side of desk stuff. That's the first thing to go when people are busy. So I would say make sure that you've got the kind of that you're showing willing as senior leaders in an organisation by providing people the time and space, and that can often be just around, if you don't already understand why ESG or DEI is important, just building an understanding of why that's important in your organisation. Because I think that I have worked for organisations before where that particular structural framework hasn't been in place, but there's been an expectation that volunteers from across the organisation will deliver a lot of the work, and it just doesn't get done.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
No, definitely. Been there too. Thank you. Anything else to add, Jess?
Just that start small, win the hearts and minds. Don't annoy everybody. start slowly. We did a lot of things of engagement. We've done some nice stuff. And as part of the activist piece, we're going to be building some bee hotels that people can put at home, or we can put them around the office. So
Oh, wow.
they get together, they get to enjoy a nice activity, but also understand that actually what we're doing is for the collective greater good, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, start small. If you're anything like I know the three of us on this call are very enthusiastic. We want to chuck ourselves in. We want to get cracking. And sometimes you have to go, whoa, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Let's just take a step back. And that's my biggest piece of advice is we're all really excited. We all really want to do the right thing, but sometimes just take a little step back and always have someone in your corner. Because when you do meet a blocker, you need to be able to get around that. So always have somebody in your back pocket or somebody within your sort of sphere of influence to be that person to help you to break those barriers down. I think that's really important. Having your own advocate for what you're doing will, ultimately set you on the road to success.
Brilliant. That's absolutely wonderful. One last question I have. Just you mentioned WWF. If anybody who hasn't even looked at ESG, for example, are there any other good websites? If somebody wants to go, I'm going to look at this, where can I go for a start? So you said WWF. Just remind everybody of anywhere else it's worth looking.
Yes, the climate section on The Guardian is very good. There's a website called EDI, so EDIE. They collect every day. They do a news article. They do a sort of like a briefing every day. That's absolutely fantastic. McKinsey & Co. They do lots of thought leadership stuff as well. I don't know from your side, Ainslie, if there's anyone else.
I'd say UN Global Compact as well, and have a look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, because that can give you that framework to start building this stuff out.
Brilliant. Excellent. Hopefully that has given someone a good overview of where they're aligned and also some good tips. So I like to get people to go away to go, well, I can go and look into this now. So brilliant. Oh, thanks so much, Ainslie. Thanks so much, Jess. Until we meet again, and I hope everybody enjoyed this podcast. Thanks very much. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.